This is a video to guide you with some tips for completing the review for your test on topic 2. So your test is coming up soon. I just wanted to go through some of the helpful hints to help you with some of the questions on this. The actual solutions will be posted later in Schoology, so you can just kind of use this as a guide to get started. So for 1 and 2, there's a series of questions you have to answer for each of these. It says sketch the graph of each function by making a table of values. Then we need to state vertex, axis of symmetry, and the y-intercept. So you are going to make an XY table for each of these. For number 1, in order to find out what number goes in the middle, that's your formula, negative b over 2a. You can also graph this on Desmos, and it will actually give you some of those points that you can use. Please make sure you're not plotting decimal points. These should all fall at what we call lattice points, which means they're going to fall at the corners of the boxes. Now, number 2 is actually in vertex form, so that's going to be identifying your HK whenever you do your XY table. So H is going to be the opposite of what's in the parentheses, so that's actually going to be a negative 2, so that would go in the middle. And then K is going to be whatever falls at the end. So that's going to be positive 2. So negative 2, positive 2 is going to be the first dot that you would plot, and then you would be able to see what the other values are using Desmos or some other type of graphing technology. So again, your vertex is the middle point. Your axis of symmetry is x equals whatever the value is for the x of the vertex. So like for number 2 here, that would be x equals negative 2. And then the y-intercept, that's actually whatever value is in the C position. So it's whatever number comes at the end of the equation. For number 1, that would be 8. For number 2, you actually have to see where it crosses the y-axis, and you'll be able to see that once you graph it on Desmos. So 3 through 8, we're factoring. This does say factor completely. Number 3 is a greatest common factor question. This is very similar to what you had to do in J1 on IXL. So you want to take out what you can divide the numbers by and take out your biggest letter. Same with number 4. And then when you get down to 5, 6, and 7, those all have 1s as the coefficient out in front. So you're finding factors of the last term that would add to make the middle term. So like for example, for number 6, you're finding 2 things that multiply to positive 60 and add to negative 16. Number 8 doesn't start with a 1. However, if you check for greatest common factor first, you can see that we can divide everything by 4. That gives us a squared plus 8a plus 7. And then what's on the inside is going to be exactly like questions 5, 6, and 7. 9 through 12, we are going to solve by factoring. So you need to factor and then set your factors equal to 0. Notice for number 9 is supposed to be an easy question. Please do not let this trip you up. Number 9 is already factored. So you don't have to do the hardest part. You don't have to do the factoring. All you have to do is take your factors and set them equal to 0 and solve those little mini equations. So if I have n minus 8 equals 0, I would add 8 to then get to my solution. 3n minus 4 equals 0, I would add the 4 and then divide by 3. So you actually end up with a fraction for that one. Number 12, again, do your GCF first, and then you can go to your 2 sets of parentheses and factor those. (13) through 16 are combining like terms. That's going to be adding and subtracting. Adding, you're not going to change any of your signs in the second set of parentheses. If you are subtracting, like number 14 and number 15, then minus gets distributed. So minus -5 is actually going to turn into a +5. Minus 4i, the minus changes that plus to a minus, and then you match up like terms. So I would match up the 8 plus 5 and the 3i and the minus 4i to combine to get my solution. 17 and 18 are FOIL questions. So you're multiplying. Oh, I spelled FOIL a little bit wrong there. Let's try that again. So I'm multiplying the first two terms, the last terms, the inside terms. I'm sorry, the last terms. The first terms, the outer terms, the inside terms, and the last term. So if I were to multiply this one, I'm going to get -6 plus 2i plus 12i, and then minus 4i squared. Anytime you multiply I times I, you're going to get I squared. And if you recall, I squared is equal to -1. So this last term is really -4 times -1, which is actually going to change it into a +4. So that +4 is actually going to be combined with the -6, and then I would combine the 2i and the 12i together. So really for the multiplying terms, once you actually do the multiplication, you have a question very similar to 13, 14, 15, and 16. And again, I haven't written down any of the answers here because I do want you to go through and try these before you look at the solutions, but I wanted to give you some hints for getting started. And so now we're on the last page here. 19 and 20, these ones are division. It's not proper to have an I in your denominator, so that is something you have to work with. So you're actually going to multiply by I over I. So that's going to turn our question into 6i over -2i squared. Well, if you remember from the previous problem that we had, anytime you have an I squared, that's equal to -1. So this is really 6i over -2 times -1, which is 6i over +2, and then you can reduce the 6 and the 2, and that becomes a 3i. So 3i would actually be your solution. So there is one that I did the solution for. 21 and 22, solve by taking square roots. This is where you isolate the term that is squared. So basically you would solve the equation pretending that there isn't a square, and then you take the square root in the last step. So 22, we would start off by adding 8. You're going to get 406. And then divide by 7. You get m squared equals 58. And then take the square root of both terms. Anytime you use the square root property, you do have to put down a plus or minus, and then you're going to look at your square root and see if it simplifies or see if it's a perfect square. Remember, anytime you have the square root of a negative, you're going to change that into an I, and that does happen in number 21. Lastly, we have solving using the quadratic formula. So again, I just did a video with this, with the worksheet that you guys had on the quadratic formula, so that should be relatively fresh in your mind. Quadratic formula, and again, this x would change to whatever letter you have in the problem. So for 23, it would be an A, 24 would be a V, 25 is an N, 26 is an M. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So you have to go through and plug in. I will say with number 26, you do have to subtract the 3 over to the left-hand side first before you can figure out your numbers for the quadratic formula. You can only do the quadratic formula whenever your equation is equal to 0. So I hope that this was helpful for you to give you, again, some guidance for getting started on this review. Go back through. You can always watch the notes from the other sections. We do have our assessment coming up soon on topic 2. and reach out to me if you have any questions.